Welcome everyone to our discussion of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which I call Children of Abraham. And if you don't know why I call it Children of Abraham, that's actually one of the major messages of the program. So I am going to, whoops, I'm going to whip all. Sorry, I'm admitting people. So as always, I want to acknowledge the support of Joel and Barbara Aronson and the trust, the Affordable Living Trust. I serve as community rabbi for the Jewish Federation of Ventura County, and that allows me to do what I love to do, which is teach. And I'm delighted that you all are here. As always, I record all of my teachings. And I have a website, and if you want copies of the materials that I'll be using, go to the website. It's just lotker.com. Up in the top, there's a classes. Whoops! Now I need. Hang on, I got admitting more people. Okay, there's a classes button, and you can see a description right up at the top of that page. You can get copies of the slides, a list of suggested reading that I'll be showing you later this evening. And then sometime after the program tonight, probably tonight, I will be posting a video of our class. And I also, for those of you who've been studying with me before, know I'll also send out an email with a direct link to that YouTube video. So the discussion, outline of the classes. And actually I prepared these PowerPoint slides for a much smaller group, so we don't have time, to have a lot of participation. There are now 53 of us in the room. The outline, it says outline of 3 classes. Well, I didn't adjust it because I've added a 4th class. First class tonight will be an introduction and the basic stories of these 3 traditions. Next week, we will discuss the holy books, sacred material from the 3 traditions. In the 3rd class, we'll discuss the fundamental beliefs, the theology of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And in the 4th class, I really haven't prepared this yet. I'm just calling it Exploring Jerusalem. I adore Jerusalem. I'm obsessed with the archaeology of Jerusalem and the holy places, and the idea that the holiest place in Judaism, the holiest place in Christianity, and the 3rd holiest place in Islam are really within a short walk of one another. So I hope to just kind of share a bunch of videos and photographs of the material. And so a few caveats, even more than what I have on the screen there. This is a Jew's, namely my perspective. This is not necessarily the Jewish perspective. I'm not even certain that there is a quote unquote Jewish perspective on these other religions. I will add a thought that my rabbinic thesis at Hebrew Union College, we write a thesis, it's equivalent to a PhD thesis. And my thesis dealt with moving toward a theology of Jewish-Christian partnership. I didn't deal with Islam in that thesis. And my perspective on this is far more than tolerance. Tolerance for me is a very low standard. I tolerate someone with poor manners. I might tolerate someone who is, in the next table from me in the restaurant and speaking, way too loudly or carrying on, or just, I might tolerate my next door neighbor who plays music too loud. I believe, and a lot of work has been done far more than I did, that we need a theology of the other. It's not just that I will put up with other religions, but I believe that Judaism can and should have a theology of why Christianity and Islam fit into the scheme of Jewish theology. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. The other thing I'll mention, as always, if you want to get a question in, you can type it in the chat room. And from time to time, I'll pause the discussion and we'll have some live question and answer. And as always, once the formal part of the program is over, I will hang around and just see if anyone wants to just continue the discussion. The other thing I want to mention is, I know darn well, because I'm looking at them, that there are people in this Zoom room that are far more knowledgeable in Christianity than am I. I don't know if any of my Muslim friends, I've invited a bunch of people from various interfaith settings. I don't know if any of my Muslim friends are in the room that will be far more knowledgeable about Islam than I, but I certainly hope that you will feel free to gently correct me when I make really dumb errors, or even not so dumb errors, and because it's much more important that we're clear about these various religions. So when I do this kind of in a small setting, I go to the blackboard and I ask people to name as many religions as they have. What do they have in common? How do they differ? We've discussed this a lot in various classes. Humans seem to gravitate toward religious understanding, and there's lots of reasons one can speculate about that. A desire to get some control over things. If you in ancient times, your very life depended on your crops growing. Your crops growing may have depended on the rain coming in their time. So therefore, the question is, what can I do to make the rain come in its time? So, reliance on God developed in ancient times, and this idea continues. One of the things I'll mention is different religions have different goals. I think I'm going to talk about this in a later discussion, but I read a very interesting book called God Is Not One, which I can honestly say is probably blasphemous in at least two of three of these traditions. And the author made the following interesting point. If we're discussing which religion is the best religion, or which religion is the truest religion, one issue is what are your goals for your religion? And I'm watching a lot of Olympics these days, and suppose we're having an argument about what's the best sport. And some of you might like golf, and I was watching Olympic badminton, who knew? And skateboarding, and basketball, and just a shot put, and discus, and high jump, and so on. And we could start to have a discussion, but we're going to get nowhere. So I will try and narrow the discussion of our sports favorites by the question: what's your favorite religion? What's your favorite sport? If your goal is scoring touchdowns, that greatly limits the discussion, although I have now learned that in rugby there are touchdowns, so at least we have two sports we can discuss. So the question is, in terms of what your religion is and which religion is most meaningful to you, the question is, what's your goal for your religion? If your goal in your religion is to attain a sense of being in compliance and being in communion with God, because your focus really isn't so much on this world, but it's on the afterlife and the eternity in God's presence, I would say Christianity is a religion which focuses on that idea. I'll contrast it with Judaism, where I would say the goal and the focus of Judaism is, how do I make this world a better place? Yes, we teach that there is another life and an afterlife, but that is not the focus. So, and I don't know actually how to characterize that. I think I've asked Muslims this, and I haven't gotten an answer, at least that I can understand, for that same question. Okay, let me continue. So I'd like to at least highlight the timeline. And I was watching actually a very detailed video on biblical archaeology, and I was very proud of myself because I sort of have this timeline now in RAM in my head, if you know what I mean. So when they were discussing various chronologies, it made sense to me. So there are many things at least for me in religion, that I feel like I have to hear 10 times before I start to get it. And so it's important to understand at least approximately the overall timeline for these traditions. So starting with Abraham and the timeline in the Bible, I'm not going to address at the moment whether the Bible is a true record of history, but the timeline that is presented in the Bible is that Abraham lives about 4,000 years ago, or we would say roughly 2000 BCE. Jews and increasingly scholars will say BCE before the Common Era rather than BC before Christ. And then you'll see instead of AD, Anno Domini, Year of Our Lord, we will say Common Era. So that's Abraham. And then we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and into Egypt, and years of slavery, and then out of Egypt. And then we have the Exodus around the time of Moses. So here we're talking roughly about 1200 BCE. Moses leads the children of Israel into the promised land. We have an era of judges, leaders, and then there's a kingship. And then I would say the Bible centers around, in no small part, stories of David and Solomon. And the rough timeline for that is about 1000 BCE. Solomon builds a temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and that temple survives until about 586 BCE. So realize we're talking about hundreds of years here in this chronology. The temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. The Jews are carried off to Babylon. Babylon's conquered by Persia. Persia allows the Jews to return. The temple's rebuilt about 50 years later. In terms of sacred scripture, scholars believe that the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible, reach its current form about 400 BCE. And the next section of the Hebrew Bible, the prophets, about 200 years later. Coming now into times important in Christianity, Jesus is born somewhere around the year 0. There's a change from one calendar to a Gregorian calendar, and that makes about a 4-year difference. And then Jesus is executed about in the year 33 of the Common Era. The temple is destroyed some 40 years later by the Romans. Then we have record of rabbis considering various books of the Bible, and scholars believe that the Hebrew Bible reaches its current form about the year 90. My understanding, and again, my Christian friends may have more complete information on this, more detailed information on this, the New Testament is written over a period of many years and reaches its current form about the year 150 of the Common Era. Another very important date in Christianity is the acceptance of the Roman Empire of Christianity in the year 313. And then shortly thereafter, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. Those of you who study with me, and certainly you come to Torah studies Saturday mornings and Talmud studies Saturday mornings, know that the critical document in Judaism, particularly for rabbinic Judaism, that is the Judaism that we practice today, is in fact the Talmud. The Talmud reaches its current form about in the year 500 of the Common Era. And it's actually after this time that Islam comes on the scene. So Muhammad's lifespan you see there, and we'll see, tonight and continuing, the role of Muhammad, who is understood to be the seal of the prophets in Islam, the final and therefore most authoritative prophet in Islam, is in the early late 6th, early 7th century of the Common Era, and the beginning of Muhammad's calendar. Of the Muslim calendar is in the year 622 of the Common Era, and it relates not to the birth of Muhammad, but to his emigration to Medina. So let me pause. Any questions on this or corrections? I'll just take a few questions. Jay, you need to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. The thing that bothers me with your list here is one thing. If we come down to where it says the Torah was completed in 400 BCE.
Right.
Rabbi, who wrote that Torah?
So this is the scholars. I should always put my yarmulke on, take my yarmulkes off. That date refers to what scholars would say about the Torah text reaching its current form. Traditional Jews would say God dictated the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, so that would have been 1200 BCE.
Yes.
And the mystics would say the Torah preceded the creation of the universe, so that would be 5,781 years ago. So I will try and be clearer, and I thank you for reminding me of this, as to whether I'm talking about scholarly discussion or traditional discussions. David.
Yeah, you mixed up the calendars, Julian versus Gregorian. Julian calendar started with Julius Caesar about the time the Second Temple was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gregorian calendar began with Pope Gregory around 1500.
Yeah, I don't know how I could have mixed it up because I wasn't sure which was which. So, but thank you for clarifying it. The calendar we currently use is the Gregorian calendar. Is that correct? Okay, let's move on. So this is a slide I use a lot, and it talks about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. And I should hasten to add, I know a lot more about Judaism than I know about Christianity, and I know a lot more about Christianity than I know about Islam. And I think, that I don't want to hide that. So there will be many times when I will just say I don't know. But this is important for us to understand. Once upon a time, there was a religion called Biblical Judaism. The text of Biblical Judaism is the Hebrew Bible. The way you worshiped, if you were a biblical Jew, is you would go to one place and one place only, the temple in Jerusalem, and you would have a priest as an intermediary between you and God, and you would have the priest sacrifice various things, animals, liquids, grains, and so on, for you, in order to praise God, to thank God for good things, to atone for sins, and so on. Most of what we think about in Judaism today, including things like going to worship together, studying sacred books, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, Hanukkah, the phrase Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, almost everything that we associate with Judaism is not in biblical Judaism. In the first century, there are two critical events which give rise to rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. In Christianity, the critical event is, if you are a Christian, the arrival of Jesus, who is not only understood as a teacher, a rabbi, and a faith healer, but is understood to be the Messiah, and in an increasingly developed sense is understood to be not only fully human, but also fully God. If that's your understanding of Jesus, then you need more than the good old Hebrew Bible. So then your sacred text becomes the Hebrew Bible, supplemented, or I should say the Christian Bible is the combination of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. Excuse me. On the rabbinic side of the house, on the Jewish side of the house, the critical event is the destruction of the temple by the Romans in the year 70. If you are a Jew at this point in time, you are left without a way to worship God, because there's no temple, and the understanding in the book of Deuteronomy is we're allowed to sacrifice to God only, in the words of Deuteronomy, in the place where God will cause God's name to dwell. And that place has been destroyed. So the question is, what do we do now? And one possibility is build another temple. And there's some archaeological evidence that that happened in a couple of different places. Another possibility is, well, the Romans destroyed the God of Israel's temple. The Romans must be stronger than the gods of the Romans must be stronger than the God of the Israelites. We'll worship Roman gods. Another possibility is we have this new form of Judaism springing up, Christianity. Maybe we should go over to that. The other thing that happens is, and I choose my words carefully as a Reform rabbi, the rabbis of the time reformed Judaism. And they reformed Judaism from a religion based primarily on animal sacrifice to a religion based, not at all on animal sacrifice, but based on prayer, on community prayer, on study of sacred text, and on doing mitzvot, and on following God's laws. That's a dramatic and drastic change to Judaism. I often point out that Christianity, in some Christian movements, and you'll hear in a little while why there are so many, but in some Christian movements, Christianity is actually closer to biblical Judaism than is rabbinic Judaism. As you know, in some Christian movements, as you know, there is still a priesthood. In some Christian movements, the idea of sacrifice is continued through the Eucharist, where people take part in the sacrifice of Jesus. If you want to get at least a flavor of what the temple in Jerusalem and that worship service might have been like, I suggest you go to a Greek Orthodox service where there are screens, there are sections where only the priests can go, there's incense, and it's probably, it is a lot more like what happened in biblical Judaism. So Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism is the Judaism of the last 2,000 years, are really siblings. It's not a parent and a child. The parent is biblical Judaism. For Rabbinic Judaism, the text of the Hebrew Bible and the Mishnah and the Talmud. And was one more comment about this. What's going on here is you have two different traditions reading the same text, the Hebrew Bible. Jews are reading the Hebrew Bible through the interpretive lens of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Christians are reading the Hebrew Bible through the interpretive lens of the New Testament and the Church Fathers. And as I love to point out, Hebrew as a language is flexible enough and ambiguous enough for both of these religions to have a reasonable reading of the Bible, especially when you understand that by and large Christianity begins by reading the Hebrew Bible in Greek. It's a Jewish translation, but it is a different language. And as we'll see in a couple of cases, that makes a big difference. Any questions about that? Okay, so a very brief introduction to the three traditions, and some of this I've already focused on. One is Judaism is the religion of the Talmud. I would say not more so than the religion of the Hebrew Bible. I would say it's more the religion of the Talmud. And I mentioned a few things: bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, Rosh Hashanah, getting together to pray, prayer books, blessings. None of that is in the Hebrew Bible. It's all in the Talmud. Judaism is a religion more of orthopraxy rather than orthodoxy. Technically, orthodoxy means you should have the correct belief, the correct doxology. Orthopraxy means you should be doing the correct actions, praxis. And I would say both Judaism and Islam, we'll get to Islam, are focused much more on what you're supposed to do. In fact, the Jerusalem Talmud quotes God as saying, "Better the Jews obey my laws than they believe in me." So for Judaism, the focus is on what you do, and there's a lot of ethical laws in Judaism, and there's a lot of ritual laws in Judaism, and traditional Jews understand these are all from God, and we have to follow them as well as we possibly can. I would say in the Reform movement, we focus much more on the ethical rules than the ritual rules. Judaism is unique in that it is both a people and a religion. As one of my teachers, David Wolpe, once said, he said, this is only misunderstood by two groups, Jews and non-Jews, just those two. Judaism is both a religion and a people. Judaism is the sole survivor of a time in which your nationality and your religion were one and the same. If you are a Roman, you worship Roman gods. If you were a Greek, you worship Greek gods. Babylonian, worship Babylonian gods. I often say, if you're an Egyptian and somebody asks you what your religion is, you wouldn't know what they're talking about. You know, are they asking you what your favorite god is? I'm an Egyptian. I worship Egyptian gods. And by the way, pagans were very tolerant of other religions. So, you know, if you were I don't know, an Egyptian and you visited Rome, you would worship Roman gods just to be a well-behaved visitor. There was no issue there. Judaism is the last surviving example of the Israelite religion. If you lived in Israel, if you lived in the Holy Land, you worship, if you were an Israelite, you worship the Israelite God. And by last surviving example, this continues to this day. The child of two Jews is considered Jewish, no matter what that person believes. In fact, it doesn't even matter if that person knows it. And the example I always use is Madeleine Albright, who learned quite late in her life that when she was born, her parents were Jewish. They converted to another religion to try and escape anti-Semitism, but she, because she's born of a Jewish mother, and we can talk about that if there's interest, why it develops down the mother's line. She was born Jewish, and that's all that's needed. And by the way, once you're in, you can't get out. You can't change your nationality. You can convert to another religion, but Judaism would still consider you to be Jewish. There are not that many movements. Well, there's not that many Jews. I think I have a population slide here somewhere, but there's a handful of movements. Judaism, by and large, does not seek converts. In the words of a rabbi that had a lot of influence on me, Alan Greenbaum, the retired rabbi from Temple Adat Elohim, Judaism is the one true religion for Jews. You will never see people knocking on your door with the good news about Moses. We don't run around and try and convert people to Judaism. There have been very brief episodes in our history where that happened, but by and large, history filtered that out, because for most of Jewish history, if a rabbi were to convert a non-Jew to Judaism, both the rabbi and the convert would have committed capital crimes and could be put to death. So pretty quickly, that stopped being a common practice. Yeah, there's the population. About 15 million people are Jewish. You know, some issue about how do you define who is a Jew, but that's about the number. It's about 0.2% of the world's population. And most people in the world have never met a Jew. And it's also, you know, fascinating that in some places, notably Japan, where there has been a history of anti-Semitism, there are virtually no Jews living there, and that hasn't seemed to stop anti-Semitism. Christianity grows out of Judaism and the Jewish concept of Messiah. I'm going to be discussing that in far greater detail, I think, in subsequent evenings, and then adds elements that are foreign to Judaism. Certainly the concept of Messiah is something that grows out of Judaism. As we will see, Christianity greatly expands the understanding of what is meant by the word Messiah and the concept of Messiah. And then Christianity adds concepts that are quite foreign to Judaism, most notably the idea that God would take on human form, that God becomes incarnate. As we've discussed, adds the New Testament to the Hebrew Bible. And one important element here is Christianity incorporates completely the Hebrew Bible. And that was actually quite a controversial issue in the early days of Christianity. There is a council, I think in the 4th century at Nicaea, where some of these critical issues, namely, what's the nature of Jesus? Is Jesus fully God, fully human, both. Should Christianity incorporate the Hebrew Bible into Christian scripture? All of these, many of these issues are addressed and I guess many settled in this Council of Nicaea. Christianity, for reasons we will see, quickly becomes a Gentile and not a Jewish movement. In the first century, in the 50, 60 years after the death of Jesus, Christianity was by and large a Jewish movement. And, we'll see when we talk about history, there were a bunch of different movements within Judaism at that time, but it very quickly becomes a Gentile movement under the influence of Paul. We're going to discuss that quite a bit, with a very good reason, namely the primary market for converting folks to Christianity was Rome. And Rome was not at all happy with the Jews because the Jews had put up a very difficult rebellion against Rome in the year 66. And the Romans were not pleased with Jews and Judaism. So Christianity very quickly becomes a Gentile movement. Christianity in its early stages is wildly successful when the Roman Empire adopts Christianity as the state religion. And today there are many, many Christian movements. I heard a Christian scholar say today there are 42,000 separate Christian movements. And this actually makes sense to me because Christianity is a religion of correct belief and faith. So if you're in the second church of Jesus in Camarillo, and you believe in all of the teachings of the second church of Jesus Camarillo, except for 3, well, you got to go start the third church of Jesus in Camarillo, because disagreements in basic beliefs and theology are crucial, far more crucial in the Christian world than they are in the Jewish world. And that's why we have so many different Christian movements. Having said that, Catholics, I think, account for roughly half of all Christians. Christianity, as you know, seeks converts. And when I checked to update this slide, the estimate was about 2 billion people, or about 31% of the world, are Christian. Richard.
Why do you think Jews don't focus on conversion?
Oh, for one thing, it would have resulted in mass execution. I mean, that's a practical reason. And I think the theology followed, this is what I think, I'm not sure scholars would say this, but the theology follows the practice. You're not going to do something that's going to get you killed a lot. And also, there's no theological reason that other people need to become Jewish. Judaism is a religion for Jews. It arose when every people had its own religion. Egyptians didn't go to Rome to seek Roman converts. So the idea of seeking converts really becomes, I would say, enters in Christianity. And I would say Christianity is the first religion in the modern sense, in that it focuses on what you're supposed to believe rather than your birth.
If you believed that your religion was a positive influence in life, in lives, wouldn't that be an impetus for thinking, gee, maybe we can help other people also by
who want to kill you for that idea? I would say, think about it this way. Do you think being an American is a positive thing in life? I would say yes.
I think American values are a positive thing.
Right. So do you think we should run around the world trying to get people to become Americans? And
I think we should. I think it's important to try to instill American values in the world.
Okay, I understand the distinction, but you know that England and other countries went around the world colonizing countries, basically to convert them to become English and to become Christian. That never developed in Judaism. And I would say, by the way, in case you're not paying attention, Christianity and Islam espouses the same values. So in a way, we're doing a fine job, and that's one of my overriding messages. Jane, then David, then we'll move on.
I'm not sure I fully understand when you're saying we don't see converts, but if we did, there'd be, you know,
Yes, it would be a capital punishment. So what I would say is I mean, Judaism has always, not always, in Talmudic, the idea of conversion doesn't exist in the Hebrew Bible. We do have a concept of conversion in the Talmud. So in Talmudic times, so starting maybe as much as 2,000 years ago, there were paths for people to become Jewish. As you may know, a rabbi is supposed to discourage someone 3 times before accepting them to study Judaism as a convert. We do know that during those times, if a rabbi converted someone under Roman rule, under Christian rule, under Muslim rule, that person could be put to death. So this never became a very big thing in Judaism. That's what I meant.
And what about in the modern?
I mean, yes.
When you think that we're less than
0.2%. Yeah, so I would say Reform Judaism quite controversially decided 30, 40 years ago to actively welcome unchurched people into Judaism, rather than discouraging people, actually welcoming them. But I don't know of any Jewish movement that goes out and seeks people to convert to Judaism.
Okay.
David.
Yeah, the problem is that there were indeed strict laws prohibiting Jews from converting Christians to Judaism.
Yes.
Some of that still exists today.
Yes.
And in India, it is a serious criminal offense for a Muslim to try and convert a Hindu to Islam.
Okay. So I think I've read that too, and I'll also just observe my wife and I went to China. You know, I don't know, about 11 years ago, and I had to sign documents saying I'm not bringing any religious materials into China, and I'm not going to be, you know, doing any religious teaching in China. And I don't remember, I think I wrote on my visa application that I was a teacher rather than a rabbi, because I really wanted to go to China. Okay, let me get back to the subject. Islam. The word Islam means submission, meaning submission to the will of God. By the way, Israel, as many of you know, means one who wrestles with God. Islam means one who submits to the will of God. The word, as I understand it, is related to salam, which means shalom. By the way, Arabic and Hebrew are closely related languages. As I'm reading more about Islam, you know, and phrases in Islam, I understand those phrases from the Hebrew. One who surrenders, one whose faith is Islam, is a Muslim. And Arabic, like Hebrew, when you go from a verb to a noun, sometimes you add an M in the beginning. So the word to command is tzivah, and a commandment, the noun, is a mitzvah. So the word for submission is Islam. The word for one who submits is a Muslim. Islam is heavily influenced by both Christianity and Judaism. Allah is simply the Arabic word for God, from the same root as El and Elohim. Same God, God of Abraham, as Judaism and Christianity. Islam, as we will see in some detail, traces its history back to Abraham through his son Ishmael, not through his son Isaac. Islam begins as an Arab religion, but expands very quickly into the non-Arab world. And I'm pretty certain that there are more non-Arab Muslims today than there are Arab Muslims. The holy book is the Koran. And again, I'm going to be highlighting similarities between Hebrew and Arabic. The Hebrew for to call out is kara. Someone who reads the Torah is called a Baal, master, koreh of the readings. And so the Quran comes from that same root. It includes a lot of stories and teachings from the Hebrew Bible and also from Midrash and also from the New Testament. But it doesn't incorporate the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Bible in the same way that Christianity just simply incorporates the Hebrew Bible. I hope I'm being clear about that. As you will see, Islam understands its Bible, its revelation, to be the final and the most perfect revelation. We can see lots of differences between the Quran and the Hebrew Bible, for example. So from a Jewish point of view, we would say Muslims got it wrong in the Quran, and the Muslims would say, the Jews got it wrong in the Hebrew Bible. Hard as it is to believe two people from different backgrounds disagreeing over something fundamental. Muhammad is understood as the primary and the last prophet. It seems to me that in virtually every religion that I'm familiar with the exception of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, religions have to close their prophecy. If you leave prophecy open, you leave open the possibility that somebody can come along and completely change your religion. So Muhammad is the last understood to be what is called in Islam the seal of the prophets. It is much closer to Judaism than it is to Christianity. Certain elements of Christianity are outright blasphemy in Islam, namely the idea that God is three and God would take on human form. In similarities between Islam and Judaism, you have the idea that the fundamental issue is correct behavior. So in Judaism, we call correct behavior or Jewish law halakha, which means the walking, as in walking along a path. In Islam, Muslim law is called Sharia, which also means walking along the proper path. And the emphasis is on what you do more than what you believe, although I would say Islam focuses more on proper belief than my understanding in most of Judaism. There are two major movements that we hear about a lot today, Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. And this has to do with a historical split over Muhammad's succession. And I don't have this information in RAM. There were a bunch of different caliphs that succeeded Muhammad. And at one point in time, there's a split to who should be the correct successor to Muhammad. And a group led by a caliph named Ali starts the party of Ali. The word Shia means party. So that's the major other Muslim movement. There are other Muslim movements beyond these two as well. Islam certainly seeks converts, although there's a very interesting relationship where Islam said, the basic idea in Islam, and we will get to this, that God had a revelation, Allah had a revelation to all peoples. Most didn't write down the revelation. Christianity and Judaism wrote down the revelation, and they are described in Islam as being people of the book. That's a term we use a lot in Judaism, but its origin is Muslim. And peoples of the book are not to be converted as long as they are willing to live under the rule of Islam. And we'll talk more about that. So technically, Islam does not seek to convert Jews or Christians. Then you have recently, and this is an important issue, Islam, the religion, and I don't see this word that much anymore, but Islamicism, which I would say is more a political movement than a power movement, that I would say uses Islam as a pretext to conquer lands and peoples. And, you know, if there's, we may get into a lot of discussion about this, that groups of Muslim scholars to highlight ISIS, a group of hundreds of Muslim scholars wrote a letter to the then head of ISIS, who was named al-Baghdadi, and the name of the letter is the letter to al-Baghdadi. You can Google it. And it goes point by point in very technical Muslim legal terms, pointing out that everything that ISIS is doing is in violation of Muslim law. And there's about 1.5 billion people in the world who are Muslim, or about 23%. Here are the basic stories, and I've highlighted some of this as we've gone along. Judaism reads the Hebrew Bible through the interpretive lens of the Talmud and the rabbis. And when I say the rabbis, I don't mean me and my buddies. I mean rabbis who lived in rabbinic times, and rabbinic times sort of end in the year 500 or 600 of the Common Era. So, for example, in reading it through rabbinic eyes, the story of creation is not a science textbook, it's not a history textbook, but Judaism understands that the Bible is teaching who's in charge, and the Bible is also emphasizing the point that creation is calm and quiet and orderly and results in the creation of humanity. If you read the creation myths that preceded the Bible, there are wars between different gods, and at one point in time, I think in Gilgamesh, a sea monster gets sliced open by another god, and out pops the earth and humanity. So the underlying message in the Jewish creation story is humanity is the pinnacle of creation and the purpose of creation. Also highlighting, you know, the biblical text, and we discuss this all the time in Bible study, is that the characters are very human and very flawed. At Temple Adat Elohim, our Saturday morning Torah study is reading the book of Genesis, and I always say the book of Genesis is a wonderful manual for parenting. Everything you see in the book of Genesis, don't do at home. These people are terrible. Even, you know, the greatest and the most idealized leader in Judaism, King David, is an adulterer, a murderer, a philanderer. These are very human people. This is not true, I would say, of Christian understanding of Jesus, and it is certainly not true of a Muslim understanding of Muhammad. There is this very interesting story, you know, that all Jews are very familiar with, I would say Christians are familiar with, of the exile in Egypt. Why did we go there? What happened? How did we get out? And most interestingly, what's the significance? Why is this part of our national myth? I mean, it may be historical. In fact, there's probably a historical kernel behind the Egyptian exile, but it becomes central to our myth, and that's an interesting question. Judaism is a religion which focuses on redemption, of making the world a better place, of crossing the sea, and I love to point out, Judaism gives the world a tremendous insight and gift, and that insight and gift is the idea that history has direction. If you were, you know, a slave in Egyptian times, a serf in medieval times, if you were a cave dweller, a hunter-gatherer, you would understand quite clearly that your children's life, their children's life, will be exactly the same as your life, just as your life is exactly the same as your parents and grandparents. The concept that we're trying to make the world a better place, if you're living in a cave, if you're a serf, if you're a slave, is absurd. Judaism gives the world a gift. There's a wonderful book by, I think it's by Thomas Cahill, called The Gift of the Jews. Judaism gives the world an astounding insight and gift, and that gift is, this is not the way it's supposed to be. We are given marching orders to make the world a better place. And don't kid yourself, it's not going to happen so quickly, but that's our goal. That's the idea of redemption. And in Judaism, redemption is not about what happens to my soul in heaven. Redemption is about what my job is in this world. So, we go to Sinai, we get the details of the covenant between Jews and God, people Israel and God. And even the concept of covenant is revolutionary. The concept of the relationship between a people and God having mutual obligations is an astounding insight. If you read Greek mythology, Roman mythology, the idea that the gods are going to comply with any promises made to humanity is absurd. They rape, they steal, they play tricks on each other and tricks on humans. In Judaism, Abraham challenges God. Will the God of justice not do justly in the events of Sodom and Gomorrah? So the whole idea of a covenantal relationship between humanity and divinity is another gift, another revolutionary idea in Judaism. And then, of course, the temple is destroyed. The Jews go out into the world. Can we perceive, God's role in this, or is this just simply history happening? And ultimately, certainly in Reform Judaism, we understand that our marching orders are tikkun olam, to make the world a better place. And that's the purpose of Jews and Judaism. So just some images, because I love to search Google for images. Here is a Torah scroll. In the scroll, it has certain words, and it says, bind these as a sign upon your hand and let them be symbols before your eyes. So inside these little boxes on traditional Jews are copies of those parts of those Torah scrolls. It's called tefillin. Judaism adopts a practice of covering our heads as a sign of respect for God. Judaism adopts a practice of circumcision, which is, very interesting. I'm always amazed that Reform Judaism did not get rid of circumcision. We still continue to do this. And of course, another very recognizable image are Jews praying at the vestiges of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Things you wear around your neck. There's a chai. I wear a little image of Moses with the tablets, and this belonged to my father. We are going to talk a lot about the Temple Mount and ancient Jerusalem and some notable Jews. There's Ben Gurion and Einstein. Just some images. Christianity. Christianity reads the Hebrew Bible, as I mentioned before, through the interpretive lens of the New Testament and Church Fathers. The creation story, in particular, the story of the Garden of Eden, is a focus on Adam and Eve and original sin, and connects Satan to that story. A talk I love to give, I actually don't think I have it on my website. One of these days I will put it on my website. A story I love to give, I call Revisiting the Garden of Eden with a Jewish Tour Guide. And it's a careful reading of the text. The Garden of Eden never refers to sin. So anyway, but Christianity certainly sees foundational significance in the Garden of Eden story as described, and even the Jews in the group will have heard this language before, described as the fall of man and Satan and fallen angels, and a very, very different take on the creation story. Both Islam and Christianity focus on the idea that Abraham was pious and powerful in faith even without the Torah. So again, what we Jews would say is to be the way we practice Judaism is to focus on Jewish law and the Torah, to which a reasonable Christian and Muslim response would be, well, whether Abraham was a Jew or not is worthy of its own discussion. But Abraham, certainly our founder, Avram Avinu, our father, somehow had a good relationship with God, even though he didn't have the entire Torah. Christianity focuses on Jewish law as presenting an impossible challenge. Particularly when you read the Bible in Greek, I often talk about this. The Hebrew word Torah, which in Hebrew means instruction, it actually comes from the root word for aiming an arrow. We're aiming at the right thing to do, but we understand we don't always get it right. When the Hebrew Bible is translated into Greek in a Jewish translation Why was it translated into Greek? Same reason that you probably have English translations of your Bible. Jews were heavily influenced by Greek culture and speaking Greek. When they came to the word Torah, they had to come up with a Greek word for Torah, and the Greek word they came up with was nomos. And nomos means law, so you'll often hear the Torah called, the book of the law. But the Greek word nomos has the connotation of law in a very narrow code of law sense. So it makes sense to me that the early Greek-speaking Jews would see all of these Jewish laws as an impossible challenge, and therefore develop the idea that we can't ever possibly get in good graces with God. Therefore, God must have given us, or must be giving us, an alternative path to come into a good relationship with God. And for Christians, that path is faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior. Jewish response, God doesn't expect perfection. Christian response, we need another path. So in the Gospel of John, you have the words, in the beginning was the law, was the word, meaning Torah, and the word became flesh. So the Torah, the commandments become flesh. And faith in Jesus, broadly speaking, takes the place of faith in all of these hundreds of laws that we find in the Torah. I emphasize 42,000 different Christian movements, and they all have a different take on this. And the story of the Torah, the Bible, as you know, is a story of Jews screwing up, whining in the desert, and bad kings arising, and people not following God. And a Christian understanding of that is, you see, Israel, the Israelites, did not do a good job of keeping the proper faith. Therefore, we are responsible ourselves for our diaspora and the destruction of the temple. And actually, there's a lot of Jewish tradition which leans in that same direction. Christianity certainly focuses on Jesus, birth of and Christmas, and as you know, there's a concept of a miracle birth, in this case, a virgin birth. And the key here for the question of virgin birth is the Greek translation of Isaiah 7:14. The Greek translation is that a young woman will become pregnant and give birth. One might hope such a young woman would be a virgin, but she is called an alma, which is young woman, when there is a perfectly good Hebrew word betula, which means virgin. Jesus' early life is as a son of a carpenter, and he turns out to be a great scholar, which impresses the Jewish teaching establishment at the time. And a lot of the New Testament describes his teachings, which are by and large Jewish. And he's not considered a Jewish prophet for two reasons. One is he goes beyond Jewish teaching, and notably in the Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount, you will hear language like, others have said, honor your father and mother. I tell you, and then he goes beyond this. So the role of a prophet in both Islam and in Judaism is to simply repeat God's instructions. But Jesus teaches in his own name, in addition to God's name, so he goes beyond the scope of being a prophet in a Jewish sense. But he is considered a prophet in Islam, and we'll talk more about that. There's a lot. I'm going to mute everybody for a moment. I know, Jan, you have your hand up. Jesus teaches that the coming of God's kingdom, that, messianic times, eschatological times, end of history, are coming soon. He is teaching in very turbulent times. This is a time of foment against Roman rule. There are lots of Jewish movements at the time: the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes. The Essenes become the Dead Sea cult, the Zealots, who are preaching rebellion against Rome, and then a new movement starts, the Nazarenes. In modern Hebrew and in classical Hebrew, Christians are called Notzrim. after the town Nazareth, namely the guy from Nazareth. Christianity, by and large, teaches that ethics and faith are more important than strict observance of Jewish law. And there's some similarity there to Reform Judaism. It's the criticism, this is very complicated. There is anti-Semitism and criticism of Jews and particularly scholars and Pharisees in the New Testament. And there are ways to understand this in historical context, because basically the authors of the New Testament were trying to attract Roman converts, and Rome killed Jesus. We'll talk about that. And so they had to somehow lay the blame on the Jews. Really what's going on in these early days is an intra-Jewish debate. The Jews that are following Jesus and the Jews that are, that are not following Jesus. Let me just see if I have more about Christianity. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. Jesus gets in trouble with Roman rulers. He's the leader of large numbers of people. They decide to put him to death as a rebel, as a zealot. On the cross, there's a phrase that says, Jesus, King of the Jews. Jews would never use such a phrase. We would say, Melech Israel, King of Israel. But the Romans, when they crucified people, and they crucified hundreds and thousands of people, on top of the crosses, they would put the crime for which the person has been executed. And Jesus is executed as a zealot, as someone who is perceived by Rome as ultimately someone who they fear would lead a rebellion. The passion, the execution of Jesus, a key issue is, did the Jews in fact kill Jesus? And there's an abundance of historical evidence which shows that this is not true. Crucifixion was not a Jewish form of capital punishment. There were Jewish forms of capital punishment. In those days, around the time of Jesus, the Jews had no power to execute anyone. And the high priest, who's mentioned a lot in the stories of Jesus' death, Caiaphas, was particularly subservient to Rome. He was the longest standing high priest, the longest term of office during this period. And that's clearly evidence that he was submissive to the will of Rome. In the gospel, there's described, I think this is in Matthew, the idea that the Jews were allowed to set one prisoner free at Passover. This doesn't exist in Jewish tradition. The Jews insist on Jesus' crucifixion. In Matthew, they say, we take the death of Jesus, the blood of Jesus, literally, on ourselves and on our children. And there's no precedent in Jewish law or in Roman law for this kind of proceeding. My understanding of the story is the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, are written after the destruction of the temple, and they're written in the context of Christianity courting Rome, somehow trying to shift the blame from the Romans to the Jews for the death of Jesus. Oh boy, there's more in Christianity. A critical element here is the role of Paul. Paul was a Jew named Saul who never met Jesus, but had a mystical vision of him, an epiphany, where he is literally struck blind by a vision of Jesus on the road to Damascus. And Paul's brilliance and Paul's insight is in the idea that you don't have to be Jewish to be Christian. Remember, Christianity starts off as a Jewish movement. So in order to become a good Christian, you would have to be a Jew first. You can't become a Orthodox Jew or a conservative Jew or a Reformed Jew and not become a Jew. Paul understands that Christianity is a path to the God of Abraham for everyone, not just for the Jews. The meaning of Jesus' life and death in this context is that Jesus is the perfect sacrifice, like in the Bible. We sacrificed animals for sins. So for the greatest sin of all, namely original sin, we need the greatest sacrifice of all, namely God become human, and in the person of Jesus without any blemishes. In the temple in Jerusalem, you wouldn't sacrifice a blemished animal. You had to sacrifice as close to a perfect animal as you possibly can. And further along in this concept, just as one man assisted by one woman, namely Adam assisted by Eve, resulted in original sin and brought sin and death into the world, one man assisted by one woman, namely Jesus, assisted by his mother Mary, resolves that issue. So it's very symmetrical. Paul is the true genius and father of Christianity. Christianity is not the religion of Jesus. Judaism was the religion of Jesus. Specifically, biblical Judaism was the religion of Jesus. Christianity is a religion about Jesus. Paul won a significant intra-Christian battle, and in the New Testament, you read accounts of this intellectual battle between groups of Christians, early Christians, about whether Christians should be following Jewish law, and whether Christians need to be Jewish in order to be Christian. And Paul, by and large, wins this battle, arguing that Christianity is the path to God for everyone, not just for Jews. And he is the author of by far most of the New Testament. So let me see, I think I'm ready for Islam. Oh boy, let me go back. I'm going to spend more time on the meaning of Jesus. Jesus is understood as being the Messiah. The English word Messiah is a translation of a Hebrew word Mashiach. When the Hebrew word Mashiach is translated into Greek, we get the Greek word Christos. So the word Christ means Messiah. Christianity, as I'm sure you know, understands God as being triune in nature, and Jesus' death is understood by Christianity as a sacrificial death for the sins of the world. And the key to justification with God and eternal life in heaven is faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior. And again, 42,000 different movements. When Christians do what Jews would call mitzvot, good deeds, it's not a ticket to get into heaven, but it's a sign that they have been influenced by Jesus, and in some traditions, saved. Jesus doesn't fulfill a single Jewish prediction associated with the Messiah. And Christianity teaches that Jesus will come a second time to fulfill those Jewish prophecies concerning the Messiah, such as peace on earth, goodwill toward men, and so on. I think I'm done with Christianity here. Oh, just some images, and then I will call on you, patient Jan. Images on the cross, Christian martyrs, the mystery of the Trinity. This is actually the site in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre of the crucifixion, images of Jesus, and Rome. So I will call on Jan, who has been very patient. And you need to unmute yourself, Jan. You'll get the right button. There you are.
There, okay. As a non-Jew, but one who highly respects Judaism and all that is involved in it, would you please just explain to me what the Talmud is and how it relates to the Pentateuch, and what is the authority? Is it Talmud or is it Pentateuch?
I will explain it to you, but not tonight. When we talk about holy books of different traditions, that's when I will explain it.
Okay.
Jay, you have your hand up?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to go back to a page, 2 pages back. Another page back. I guess it's another page back.
Why don't you just ask?
All right. You said that you read that Samson was one, and then there was 2 other. Isaac was one, and I don't know who the third one. Isaac and Samson
were. I didn't mention Samson.
No, you read it. They
miracle births.
Miracle births. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Come on, I've never heard that in my life.
Okay, so you may never have heard it. You just need to read your text carefully.
What text?
Well, for Isaac, Abraham is 99 and Sarah is 90 when Isaac is born.
As far as I'm concerned, those are stories.
They're miracle births. You might believe them or not believe them, but they're miracle births.
Okay.
Samuel also is someone praying for a birth and gets answered by God. And Samson also, same story. You may not believe these stories. You may not believe the New Testament, but they all deal with miracle births. My point in this slide is that the concept of miraculous births is a well-known concept in the Hebrew Bible. They don't go as far as virgin birth, but it is a miraculous birth. I'm glad you.
To really believe in Judaism, to believe in the Bible, I have to believe these stories?
No, Jay, you ask this all the time, and my answer is no. Particularly in Judaism, you don't have to believe anything. Judaism cares about what you do, not what you believe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to Islam, and I'm sorry this is going longer than I thought it would. I'm going to mute everyone again. So the Quran, as I mentioned, and there's various spellings, doesn't directly incorporate either the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament, little typo, but does include much material therefrom. And the concept which I mentioned, God gave revelations to all peoples. A few of them, Jews and Christians, wrote them down. But from a Muslim point of view, it's understood that we made mistakes in writing them down. The beginnings of Islam is set in Arabia in the 7th century. There are lots of Arab tribes that are warlike tribes worshiping idols. Jews and Christians are living there, and the Arabs were very familiar with Jewish and Christian stories. In the middle of this, we have what is understood by Islam to be an illiterate person named Muhammad, who is visited by the angel Gabriel. And actually, as is the case in many stories of the prophets, Muhammad is terrified and he doesn't believe that this is really an angel visiting him. And it takes his wife to convince him that it's really an angel. And I just read tonight in a book that she is considered by Islam as the first Muslim because she's the first one to believe. And the angel Gabriel dictates the Quran in elegant Arabic to Muhammad. And the fact that it's in such elegant literary Arabic is considered by Islam to be evidence of its divine source, because Muhammad himself, according to the understanding, was not literate. So Islam traces itself back to Abraham through Ishmael. So just to refresh you with the story in the Hebrew Bible and in Muslim understanding, Abraham is married to Sarah. Sarah is barren. So Sarah gives her handmaid to Abraham to have a child. The handmaid is Hagar, which in Hebrew means the stranger. And sure enough, Hagar becomes pregnant with a child named Ishmael, which means God heard or God will hear. And then later on, Sarah becomes pregnant with Isaac and has a child, Isaac. Sarah and Hagar have a falling out. If you read the story in the Hebrew Bible, Hagar disappears. She's sent into the desert to die with her son. God rescues them. And that's sort of the last we hear. I think Ishmael gathers with Isaac to bury Abraham. But by and large, we lose track of that line. In the Muslim telling of the story, Abraham has two families, and Hagar and Ishmael go to Mecca, where with Abraham, they cleanse a pagan shrine called the Kaaba, which means cube, and dedicate it to the one true God, the God of Abraham, to Allah. And so Islam traces itself back to Abraham through the line of Ishmael rather than through the line of Isaac. But there are lots of stories about Isaac and Jacob. And in fact, the person most mentioned in the Quran is not Ishmael, but Moses. And the pilgrimage, Muslims are are commanded to visit the Kaaba once in their lifetime. That pilgrimage is called the Hajj. Hajj means pilgrimage in Arabic. In Hebrew, the word for pilgrimage is Chag, which we now use to represent holidays in general and not just pilgrimage holidays. And Muhammad is viewed as sinless. Move on. The Quran we'll discuss more next time. It's in Arabic, and all translation are understood to be interpretations. So on many, it's not true of everyone, but if you open an English version of the Quran, it doesn't describe itself as a translation. It describes itself as an interpretation, which I really like, because when you're moving from one language to another, you're doing a lot of interpreting. It also gives the author of the English text far more flexibility. If you get two copies of the Quran, I think I have 3 or 4, and hold them side by side, and you read the same passage, you see very, very different language. In some ways, the Quran is more important to Islam than is the Tanakh or the New Testament is to Judaism and Christianity. A Muslim prayer service is entirely from the Quran. And as I think you know, a Jewish service has a lot of Talmudic material. It just simply has a lot of prayers written by the rabbis for prayers. It has medieval poetry and, and modern prayers. Muslims, traditional Muslims, I should always say, individual Muslims can do whatever they want, but traditionally Muslims don't question the Quran. And there's even a tradition of committing the entire Quran to memory. And once in one of my interfaith groups, we had a young man who was chanting sections of the Quran, and he tells us, and I have no reason to doubt him, that he committed the entire Quran to memory and could chant the whole Quran, and he doesn't understand the Arabic, which I find absolutely unbelievable. It's arranged in chapters called surahs and verses, and the surahs are arranged by size order. So there is no surah number 1, there is a surah number 2, and it has hundreds and hundreds of verses. And if you go to the end of the Quran, you may find surahs with only a few verses, which means there's not a chronology running through it. If you're looking for a description of Moses, for example, you may find it spread out through 6 or 7 or 8 different surahs. Like Judaism, Islam has an important oral tradition. Mainly in Islam, my understanding is these are called the hadiths, and they are oral traditions about the life of Muhammad. So where there are questions about Islam, where there are authoritative stories about Muhammad's life, we can rely on those. As I mentioned earlier, it is a religion of religious law, and certainly rejects the idea that any human that God can become human. So some images of Muslims at prayer. This is a very, if you go to a Muslim prayer service, and there are mosques in our area and they welcome visitors, there is separation of men and women, and you should wear appropriate modest dress, but there's a lot of bowing and prostrating yourself. This is a little view of the Quran. In various cultures, there are different cultural requirements for modesty. And this is not a matter of Sharia or Muslim law. Sharia says women should dress modestly, and different cultures give you the details of what that modest dress means. This, I think this is the Muslim Center in Newbury Park. I'm actually not sure about that. And this is certainly the Temple Mount. Just a few more slides, and then I will bring this to an end, and we can have some general discussion. So if you look at the genealogy of these paths to God, we begin with Abraham. And the Jewish story, we go to Isaac and Jacob, and then we have 2 sets of tribes, northern tribes and southern tribes. And then around the time of Jesus, we have lots of different movements: Sadducees, Zealots, Essenes, Pharisees, Karaites, and branching off here is Christians. And then there is a split in Christianity between Roman Catholic, Western Church, and Eastern Church. And then there is a split giving rise to thousands and thousands of Protestant denominations. Roman Catholicism continues, and there's even some splits from Roman Catholicism that call themselves traditionalist Catholic. Moving along the Jewish side, we have other Jewish movements that are dead-ended. The Sabbateans are one, Ashkenazim and Sephardim. In the Ashkenazim, we have different movements of reform: Reconstructionist, conservative, modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, Hasidim, Mitnagdim, Chabad, other Hasidic groups. So that's a fairly complicated chart. And then I have lots of suggested reading. I'm not going to spend time looking at this. This now is posted on my website, and it's suggested reading with a few phrases about what it is you can find in these books. I want to call your attention to one interesting book by Reza Aslan called Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth. This is a readable book focusing on the historical Jesus and how Christianity transformed him into the Christ. It got a lot of attention because Reza Aslan is a Muslim, and there were some circles, I think notably on Fox News or Fox Commentary, that were outraged by the idea that a Muslim would write a biography of Jesus. And the interesting thing is that that interview resulted in the success of the book, because when everybody heard how outrageous it was for a Muslim to do this, everybody wanted to get a copy of the book. Other noteworthy books with which at least my Jewish friends may not be familiar with. Here is a book by two Jewish scholars called the Jewish Annotated New Testament. There, you know, my Jewish friends will know about the Jewish Book of Why. Well, there's a Christian Book of Why. In Islam, various translations of the Quran. This same Reza Aslan wrote a book called No God But God, Origins, Evolution, and the Future of Islam. Michael Cook wrote a book, a very short introduction, and here's that book. As you can see, it's very short and it's an introduction. And then I'm in the midst of rereading this book, which is really a college level introduction and discussion of Islam. Oh, and then here's some books on interfaith understanding. I won't belabor them. And books on history. There's a lot of books. I don't know if you know this. There's a lot of books out there. And I think I've actually read all of these books. It's kind of scary. Oh, I want to remind you, I think most of you know that CNN has a series called Jerusalem, the City of Faith and Fury. And, you know, I've discovered in watching this series, my knowledge of Jerusalem really relates to Jerusalem history of Jews and Christians. But boy, I'm learning a lot. And, you know, in last Sunday's episode about Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, and just really interesting stuff. So, oh, that's next week. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. And let's see, we still have about 50 people. So the formal part of this is done. I will just ask if there are any questions. And after a while, I will stop the recording and people can chit chat and tell me what you really think. So any questions or comments? And I'm particularly interested if some of my Christian friends you know, can give me a sense whether I made any glaring errors. And the only one I see at the moment with your face in front of me is you, Jim. So not to put you on the spot, but consider yourself on the spot.
Oh, guy. Well, the only thing I thought was the beginning of John, it starts off by saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yes, and it's later, I think, in like the 4th chapter or so, the Word becomes flesh.
That's correct, but the first line is that.
Yes, yes.
I kind of stepped back when you said that Jesus doesn't fulfill any of the prophecies about the Messiah in the Old Testament.
Yeah, we'll see if I'm struck by lightning between now and next week.
What I was wondering about in terms of seeing this through a Christian lens,
Mhm.
is, I mean, God could have freed all the slaves and been fair, but he only freed the Jews. And that was for a specific reason, and I understand it, it was to introduce the world to ethical monotheism, introduce the world to the Torah. And I heard you say that Maimonides credited Christians with spreading the Torah to the world and not Jews.
Actually, I don't remember saying that tonight, but he's
Oh,
certainly.
no, this was earlier.
Yeah. Maimonides, says that one of the good things, Maimonides is actually talking about whether we should do business with Christians and Muslims, or how hostile should we be. And he says that if you're going to convert, it's better to convert to Islam than to Christianity, because Islam is closer to Judaism. But he does say that one of the side effects of Christianity is the entire world has the Torah.
Which I'm wondering, wasn't that the reason that God freed the Jews, so that the world could get the Torah? And then I'm thinking, well, if Christians did that, maybe Jews should be more in line with trying to convert people so that they can spread the Torah, which was their reason to be freed in the first place.
So what I would say is, first, the answer to all complicated theological questions is God knows. But having said that, you guys are doing a perfectly good job. Mazel tov, yasher koach, and keep at it. Judaism understands that we are to be a light to the nations, an or lagoyim, and to bring people not to Judaism, but to the knowledge of God, the one true God, the God of Abraham. So at the moment, about half the people of the world worship the God of Abraham, but they're not Jewish. I mean, a very small fraction of those are Jewish. So I would say, and I had a sermon once called "God's Plans for Christians and Jews," and so then the question arises: why would God want to keep us small and powerless? Hey, there's a question. If you understand that this is really God's plan rather than history working itself out, and I must say intellectually I'm more in line with the latter, but if I were to try and think of why would God want to keep us powerless, I would say one answer is so that we could continue to preach pure ethics. Once you're in power, you have to make ethical compromises, because you have to keep people from killing each other. You have to keep the trains running on time, and you've got to protect your borders. And it's hard to be, beating swords into plowshares when someone's coming to invade you. So I like that idea that there is a sort of a remnant who is free to preach pure ethics. And of course, this is a major challenge in today's state of Israel, because the state of Israel, as many of us, look, I am a vehement supporter of Zionism and of the state of Israel, but I don't agree with everything that the state of Israel does. And I wouldn't argue that everything that the state of Israel does is in the highest standards of ethics and Judaism, but they do have to protect their people. So that may be one reason. I don't know about why God would free one group of slaves and not other slaves. So I'm just going to comment on Julie, or someone who mentioned, I thought that in Isaiah there are prophecies that foretell the coming of the Messiah, and Jesus supposedly fulfills those prophecies. Jewish understanding of those prophecies was particularly Isaiah 50. Well, there's two major ones. Isaiah 53, which speaks about a suffering servant. And if you read it, you will understand why it sounds like Jesus. But if you understand in the context of Isaiah's discussion, the rabbis are agreed that they're talking about the people Israel. And then Isaiah 7:14, which speaks about virgin birth, if you read it in the Hebrew, it's clear they're not talking about virgin birth at all. There's a lot of discussion, and I bet, Jim, this is what you were thinking of in the New Testament, where Jesus does this, and then the narrator of the New Testament will observe this was in fulfillment of the prophecy of, of that. And often those prophecies are always coming from the Septuagint, the Greek translation, rather than the Hebrew Bible. And they're always ambiguous. And, the issue is not, is Jesus the Messiah? Messiah means anointed, means king of Israel. Jesus is never put on the throne of Israel. But the biggest question that we'll get to is the question of whether Jesus is God. So when you look at, and we'll look at this next time, Jewish prophecies concerning the Messiah are things like world peace, all the Jews gathering in Jerusalem, in Israel. Jesus certainly doesn't fulfill that. The question is whether Jesus is from the house of David. Yes, according to the genealogies in the New Testament, Jesus is from the house of David. But let's just say David got around, and there's lots of descendants of the house of David. Speaking of which, David.
Yes, two things. One is about conversion. In the religious Jewish texts, there is the Book of Ruth.
Yes.
And that was supposedly the first conversion.
With an emphasis on supposedly.
Yes.
Because there is the word conversion is never used there.
There's no ritual.
There's no ritual, there's no process. It never says that Ruth becomes an Israelite. In fact, one of the interesting things about the book of Ruth is that she's a Moabite, and Moabites are never supposed to be admitted into the community of Israel. And even more interestingly, she's the great-grandmother of King David. But it's never stated that she converts. Even more prominent, Joseph marries the daughter of an Egyptian priest, and his two sons become tribes of Israel. And it never states in the Bible that Joseph's wife, converted. There is midrash that, of course, she converted. How could she have not converted? But conversion per se is not mentioned in the Hebrew Bible at all. It is certainly mentioned in the Talmud. And you're right, we look at the book of Ruth as the prototypical convert, but we are reading into the story.
Yeah, but and the other thing is the incorporation of Torah into Christian Bible.
Yes.
Scripture. I've had people tell me, oh, the New Testament says we don't have to follow any of the Old Testament commandments.
So what I would say there, I'm looking for Jim to see if he can, I don't see him at the moment.
Well, let me tell
Okay.
you what the discussion came
No,
about. And
yeah,
that is discussion of homosexuality. And they were citing the commandments in Leviticus, for example.
yeah, but there's also New Testament commandments against homosexuality.
Yeah, but the thing is that I said, oh, well, you're citing Leviticus. What about the commandment you're not supposed to wear a red dress, or you shouldn't eat bacon? Oh, then they say,
Yeah,
the New Testament says we don't have to follow the commandment.
Okay, so I don't think the New Testament ever says that. I could be wrong. If there's a New Testament scholar to correct me, I'll be happy to hear that. But it basically has to do with what I said before. In Christianity, the understanding is that faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior takes the place of Torah. And then Christianity espouses some of the commandments, but compared to the 613 that Jews address, very few, notably the 10 commandments. And then they add a few more, such as, Jesus said that love God and love your neighbor are two of the most important commandments, and they're not in the 10. So Christianity is very selective about which commandments you have to address. And faith in Jesus takes the place of obeying all those other commandments, some of which, namely circumcision, are quite painful. We have Desmond and Emily.
Hi, I just want to make a comment.
Could you lean into your microphone a little bit? It's a little hard to hear you.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make a comment about Christians, whether following commandments, not following commandments. First of all, as Rabbi, you mentioned, Paul was instrumental in Christianity.
Love, did you say?
I said Paul. Paul.
I can't understand what you're saying. What's
Paul.
Paul, yes, yes.
Paul
Thank you, yes.
was instrumental with the sheer genius behind Christianity. Without him, Christianity would not have become anything.
Right.
If you're not Jewish and you read the New Testament, you get this impression that Paul himself was doing everything he was telling the the converts, the so-called Christians to do. But he wasn't doing that. Paul identified himself as a Jew. In fact, there's a verse where he doesn't use the past tense. He uses the present. He says, I am a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin.
Right.
We see, there was one scenario, this is Paul who was arguing against circumcision and everything, and yet he takes a so-called Christian convert to go circumcise him. Why? Well, it turns out that so-called Christian convert's mom was Jewish. That's why Paul went and circumcised this person, because the community is responsible for circumcising a child if the dad has not done it. So when we look at Paul, we need to be careful of one thing. Paul was a Jew. He just had this brilliant idea of pushing out, some aspect of the Torah to other people. And if you don't understand that and understand a lot of the arguments that Paul makes, because he spoke in the way I would expect when, in the Talmud, the rabbis, when they speak in the Talmud, sometimes it makes no damn sense. Pardon my language, but it's just a way. You see some of his arguments that he developed in Hebrew, in the chapter, in the book of Hebrews, and it's very rabbinical kind of discussion he's making. Jews don't need to convert other people because we believe that all people have a share in the world to come.
Yeah. So actually, you've made a couple of very important points. I would say all of which I agree. Paul was a Jew who. Now, there's a lot of ink spilled about Paul. He's probably more written about Paul than any other character I can think of other than Jesus in Christianity. My understanding is Paul was a Jew who remained a Jew, but he is the intellectual founder of the idea that you don't have to be Jewish to be Christian. And that was really the key point that I'm making. There's this book that I mentioned by Amy Jill Levine and Mark Brettler called The Jewish Annotated New Testament. And basically, it's a copy of the New Testament with a Jewish commentary on it. And one of the things that they stress is the writers of the New Testament, I mean, all of them except possibly for Luke were Jewish. And their style of writing, particularly parables, were very rabbinic. It's not the style of the Hebrew Bible, because the Hebrew Bible is much older. But if you read the Talmud and the Midrash, you have these stories, which are parables to teach. And of course, Jesus uses those a lot. So the style of the New Testament is very much a Jewish style. And again, one of the interesting things that I think we'll see, maybe not, but some of these midrashes and stories actually make it into the Quran as well. But I don't disagree with anything you've said, and I appreciate your clarifying it. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Are there any Muslims in the house? Is there a Muslim in the house that can help me? No, I've invited a few, but none showed up. So if there's nothing else to discuss, I will end the recording and look forward to seeing you next week.